Good afternoon, and welcome to our book discussion of Leadership in War and Peace, Masculine and Feminine, written by Dr. Joan Johnson-Freese. My name is Karin Johnston, and I'm the Research Director at Women in International Security. Women in International Security, pronounced WIIS, is a nonprofit, non-governmental organization dedicated to advancing leadership opportunities for women in the international peace and security field, and fostering engagement that links evidence-based scholarship to policy and practice. Our network of members, national chapters, and international affiliates span nearly 50 countries across 6 continents. If you want to learn about our organization and join us as a member, please visit our website. The link will be in the chat. For today's book talk, we are joined by our WIIS Senior Fellow and author, Dr. Joan Johnson-Freese. We are so grateful for this opportunity to discuss your new book. This is, again, a particularly relevant time to discuss leadership in war and peace. We have seen advancement towards women's full, equal, and meaningful participation across the peace and security field, but we have seen these advancements challenged and reversed despite evidence-based research, data, qualitative research, testimonials, and so on, that only reinforce the significant advantages of advancing women's leadership in tackling the complex challenges we currently face. So allow me to introduce you, Joan. Joan served as a professor and university professor and chair of the National Security Affairs Department at the Naval War College between 2002 and 2022. She has also been part of the government department faculty of Harvard Extension School and Harvard Summer School since 2004, where she teaches courses on women, peace, and security, leadership in war and peace, and grand strategy in U.S. national security. As a political scientist, she has published multiple articles on aspects of women, peace, and security, particularly focusing on raising awareness regarding the framework generally and within security communities specifically, believing that you can't implement what you don't know about. She is the author of Women, Peace, and Security, An Introduction, and Women versus Women, The Case for Cooperation. Over the arc of her academic career, her research also focused on space security, authoring 7 books in that field and over 100 published articles, many with a particular focus on the Chinese space program. She has testified before Congress on multiple occasions about space issues and served on the National Academy of Sciences Space Studies Board. I've had an opportunity recently, Joan, to share the podium with you to talk about women's leadership and the WPS agenda at the Hemispheric Security Conference in Miami in May. And on May 31st, here at the Military Women's Museum in Washington, you discussed your book with our WPS fellow, Kitty Pilgrim, in a presentation that I think encapsulates what your book is all about. Leadership Reimagined, who leads, how we lead, and why it matters. So I'm very pleased that I can have you to myself this time, as it were, to learn more about what you've learned about leadership. Our world is flooded by books and articles and how-to advice on how to excel as leaders, and yet the prognosis remains that leadership is in a crisis. Your book puts the spotlight on a dimension of leadership critical to success, but not often debated, and that is leadership in the different ways women and men manifest it. When I read the accolades in your book from experienced leaders and practitioners, one strong message was that leadership is complex, but in the end, effective leadership is about results. And effective leaders apply different leadership styles, including using both male and female lenses in the right measure, with the right people, at the right time, using a variety of leadership characteristics to meet the moment. What these experts value in your book gives leaders a practical how-to tool to leverage all the talent in their workforce. And as you go on to show, this resilient and results-oriented leadership, drawing in these diverse sets of talents, skills, and experiences of one's workforce, is complemented by an alignment with the Women, Peace, and Security agenda, which is a whole-of-society approach to security and conflict that seeks sustainable solutions for building durable peace. So, if I may begin by presenting the thesis of your book, which is that future great, even good leaders must utilize both masculine and feminine styles, traits, and skills, and understand when to use each to maximize their and their institution's effectiveness. Diversity across the spectrum matters a great deal. With that said, the question is, why this book now? What led you to write this book?
Well, first, thank you, Karin, and thank you to WIIS for having me and for allowing me to talk about this. One of the big points I make in the introduction to the book is I think leadership needs to be discussed more, and I welcome this opportunity to do so. So, why this book and why now? Well, as you pointed out in my introduction, leadership is in crisis, and that's not an opinion. That is shown by poll after poll, and not just in the United States, but globally. And institutions which traditionally are very trusted, the military, the Supreme Court, trust levels are very low. And so their leadership is in crisis. And secondarily, as you mentioned, I've been working for now over a decade on women, peace, and security, looking at the value added nature of having women as leaders, women participating in security related decisions. And while it has been making incremental progress, it has been progress, but I think we are seeing more and more evidence of regression. And that regression, I feel, will result in less and less effective decision making. Good leaders have to both lead people and make good decisions. And psychologists have long shown through, again, empirical evidence that diverse groups make better decisions. Part of, I think, the reason that the gender part is being pushed back is that we still have issues with what does gender equality mean. And in the 1970s, it meant, when kind of the feminist theory was just started to talk about this, it meant we're all equal, we're all the same, treat everyone the same. But like most theory, it has evolved, and we now know that everybody is the same. Well, it's the same in terms of cerebral capabilities, but men and women are different. We are different physiologically. We are motivated differently. We speak differently. We hear differently. We communicate differently. Um, and we have to stop thinking about leaders are one type. You know, that's like saying you need a tool bag of all hammers. There aren't leaders of just one type. In fact, one dimensional leaders are time and time again shown to be largely ineffective. Um, but when you have a multidimensional leader who is able to pull different tools, different traits from gender, empathy when needed, directness when needed, listening skills when needed, you know, all these different things combined are going to make for better leadership, more effective leadership, and better decision making as related to war and peace.
Can leadership be taught?
I don't think leadership can be taught, because to me that just says I will stand in front of a class and I'll talk and you're going to respond. But I think leadership can be learned. I think leadership can be learned when there is an exchange of information and ideas and opinions and discussion. When I was teaching leadership at the Naval War College, it was during the early days of the Iraq War, and when I would come into the classroom as a civilian woman academic, three things that I think the military has a little bit trouble trusting. So again, I was the trifecta there. Um, I'd get a lot of skeptical looks and crossed arms. And so rather than say, I'm going to teach you men who are just back from fighting in Iraq about leadership, I would say, let me be your Sherpa. Let me help you through what I know and what you can add, and together we will learn. I think learning is always better when all parties go in wanting to learn, wanting to expand. And we had a very useful relationship. And what I tried to do in this book is set up discussion points, set up opportunities for readers to think about and discuss with others what they thought about leadership. I said my goal, my dream would be to have this, you know, in lots of book clubs where people sat around and read this and said, well, what did you think? I used Donald Rumsfeld. as a negative example of a one-dimensional leader. He was a wrestler, he was a takedown wrestler, and that's what he knew how to do, and that's all he knew how to do in terms of leadership. And sometimes it was very effective, and sometimes it was disastrous. We need to be able to look at context. When is directness appropriate? When is empathy called for?
In October, we'll be celebrating the 25th anniversary of the adoption of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda. WIIS launched a 1325 at 25 initiative to highlight the WPS agenda's centrality in advancing women's participation in all aspects of peace building and conflict prevention. But as we know, the UN and WPS agenda is not necessarily well known or understood. Could you briefly explain it to us?
I'd be happy to. As you said, in my simplest terms, women, peace, and security is a whole of society approach to security and conflict. That is the bumper sticker right there. There are pillars because all programs have to have pillars, and we understand that. But it is a program that says decisions are better made when you are included, when you're talking to the whole population, when you are including the whole population in your decision making. That is the first pillar, participation. Protection is the second pillar, the idea that if women can't come out of their houses safely, they are not going to be able to participate. And we see too often things like gender-based violence used as a strategy in war. So there is that pillar. There's the idea that we can prevent conflicts if, in fact, we have a better understanding of the security environment, and you won't get that unless you talk to the women as well. There's a wonderful story that I've used in all my books that dates back to peace negotiations, and I think it was Sudan, where the men were in this room, these warlords were in this room, and they were arguing about who was going to get possession of a river for the valuable water. And they argued for days, and a woman who came in the room to just pour water said it might help you to know that river dried up quite a while ago. It's women have different information, different things to add. And then the idea in relief and recovery is the fourth pillar, excuse me, that we can build systems better. When you're going in for relief and recovery, there's been chaos there for some reason, whether it's an earthquake or a war, and you're going to build. And you don't have to build the same structures that were counterproductive before. You can build better legislatures. You can build better buildings. You can build better systems. So women, peace, and security is, again, this whole of society approach to security and conflict. But unfortunately, it's been through misinformation, misunderstanding, and quite blatantly misogyny, set back through right now, just a social media post, but it would not be surprising if that were codified in some kind of directive, by three basic myths. And the first myth is that women, peace, and security is just DEI in another form. And that is wrong. The two share the idea that more women is good, but the motivations and goals are different. DEI is a social justice program to get more minorities, including women, into traditionally all male spaces for this better decision making. It's usually run through human resources offices. It's about quotas, it's about numbers. Women, Peace, and Security is an operational program, an operational security program where women are added for the value they bring. So this idea that women, peace, and security and DEI are the same things is totally false. The second myth is somewhat a function of a branding issue: women, peace, and security. The skeptics say it's all about women. It is not all about women. It's about men, women, boys, and girls, and how policies and programs affect each differently. how do they affect them differently? Well, on a very, very simple level, more women than men die from car crashes. And it is not because women are worse drivers. It's because that until very recently, the crash dummies that have been used to set safety standards are all men. A safety standard that is appropriate for a 6-foot, 200-pound man will not work the same way for a 5-foot, 200-pound woman. So that's the idea that policies and programs affect men and women differently. On a global scale, you can use the example of usually food aid is given to landowners who are usually men, even though most of the agricultural workers are women. The Food and Agriculture Organization has said if we simply distributed aid differently, not more, we're not looking for more money, just distribute it differently to those who work the fields, we could have 500 million less hungry people in the world. So that's the second area. And then the third is primarily affects the military. It's this idea that somehow including women detracts from lethality. And that too is absolutely wrong. With including women, you're expanding the talent pool for a workforce. And future wars are not going to be fought by brawn. They're going to be fought by brains. And again, women and men equal cerebral capabilities. And I think we're really engaging in some truly detrimental actions right now. I was reading a post on LinkedIn yesterday from my friend and colleague Bree Fram, who has now been separated, a colonel in the Space Force. She has been separated from Space Force. She is a transgender astronaut or astronautical engineer. Do we have a lot of astronautical engineers, an excess of them in the military, that we can afford to exclude these very talented people? I don't think so. So this idea that somehow inclusion is detracting from lethality is just demonstrably wrong. So women, peace, and security is an additive to our national security portfolio, which is now being rolled back.
So given all this, what you just said, what is the future of WPS?
I think in the near term, we're going to see in government programs in the United States. Keep in mind that, as you well know, women, peace, and security is global. It's not a US program by any means, and we're kidding ourselves if we think that. It is a global program which in many countries will continue to move forward. I've spoken with representatives from several different countries who have asked that same question. How do we go forward now, even though the United States is shooting themselves in the foot with this regression? So in the United States, I think we're going to see a lot of what I refer to as death of 1,000 cuts. That there might be a Women, Peace, and Security office in the State Department, the Air Force, Space Force, wherever, but it likely may not have any programs or funding. It will be, there used to be, when I was growing up, there was a commercial about the Maytag repairman being the loneliest man there was. Well, the Women, Peace, and Security gender advisors might be the new version of the Maytag repairman. And I can't tell you, Karin, how many emails and phone calls I get from individuals that I've had the honor to work with saying how despondent they are that all their programs and all their funding has been cut back because they were seeing such advancement when they worked with other countries. So I think it is going to be depressing, to say the least, in the near term for the government. But I do think there will be opportunities for private sectors to pick up on this. And businesses have evidence. They know the value of diversity. We see it in the Fortune 500 companies with women on the board, et cetera. So I think there will be foundations and private sources maybe moving away from the kind of the Washington sphere and more into the New York, Los Angeles, Seattle sphere, where there is recognition and where we can keep programs alive to the best of our ability and continue to spread knowledge. I think that is so important, that we continue to spread knowledge about what women, peace, and security really is, how it benefits U.S. national security, well, it benefits global security, and kind of dispel these myths.
Yes, how important value of knowledge and understanding is for trying to resolve the issues that we have, trying to find solutions to things, very much.
Yeah.
But we're in this political climate. So in this political climate, talking about the benefits of gender equality is difficult and takes different approaches, as you point out in your book, than in the past, maybe. So how do we begin to persuade people of the value of women, peace, and security, of gender equality today?
I find the two most effective ways to do this approaches is data and stories. Different people are persuaded different ways. Some people want data. So when I'm giving presentations on women, peace, and security, I always start with what it isn't and then what it is. And then I give data to back up the differences in countries where gender equality is high or low, and corresponding results. Dr. Valerie Hudson at Texas A&M and her Women's Stat Project have produced a wealth of data that demonstrates that when gender equality is low, there tends to be more autocracy, more corruption, more ineffective government, the whole list of bad things you don't want to see. And the higher gender equality, the more tendency towards democracy, towards goal achievement, towards effective decision making. So for some individuals, that's what they want to see. I gave a talk to an audience of special operations, a very tough audience, I might add. And at the end of it, I had a man come up to me and say, he was a SEAL team commander, and he said, "You had me at your slide on data." For other people, they want to hear stories. That's what they remember. And so the book, as you know, includes a wealth of stories, which I was very fortunate to get over the years from students and individuals I worked with. And when I started writing the book, the number of individuals who allowed me to interview them and then came to me, people came and said, "You interviewed my friend. Would you want to interview me too?" And of course I did. And the story I like to tell that I think demonstrates what women can add is from the incredible women, the incredible members of the cultural support teams that served in Afghanistan, the women who, through intense training, went out with the special operations forces on their missions, their night missions, their kick down the door missions. And their job was to deal with the women and children. The men in the special operations were not allowed to talk to Muslim women. And they were usually out on these missions to find a person or weapons, one of the two. And one of the women I spoke with told me this story that I think is, again, indicative of what they can add, what they did add. That on one of these night missions, when she would go out, she would stuff in her pockets little beanie babies. She'd have her family send them from home. And she said some of the men on her team made fun of her, but she didn't care. She took them out, and they were on a particularly tense mission where things could have gone bad very quickly. And she went over and she was talking to the women and the children, and she noticed one little boy who was very scared, very nervous, and she knelt down and she talked to him, and she gave him a beanie baby, and she took him over to his mother, and she continued to talk to the women. And a few minutes later, she felt somebody grab her hand, and she looked down, and it was the little boy. And he took her by the hand and took her over to where the guns that the men were looking for were hidden. The mission was accomplished with no escalation to violence, with nobody getting hurt, nobody getting killed. because she had won the trust of this little boy. She could make a connection that the men couldn't or didn't make. And I think, again, in so many situations, women can de-escalate, that there is a tendency, there is a trait, men who want to win and tend to compete, whereas women try to bring things down and try to reach the goal through other methods. So I think whether it's through data or stories, and I have a wealth of both, I think we can continue to tell our very valuable story and continue to win people over.
Yeah. And just in that vein, if I could digress, you tell, as you say, a lot of these stories. And what I would love for you, if you could, I mean, you mentioned Rumsfeld, sort of the sort of bad leadership examples, or Admiral Rickover, who I remember from also this sense of a kind of very masculinized sort of leadership. If you could give us a sense sort of how in your interviews and in the research you've done, sort of what, how what comparing sort of the bad leadership with what kind of traits make for, a leadership that excels and that gets you the mission outcomes they need. You have so many of those, just pull together some of those wonderful stories you have.
Yeah. Well, again, it goes back to gender, that men and women are socialized. We've spent 50 plus years looking at the changing role of women in society. We haven't spent that much time or energy looking at how the role of men has changed in society. We still use, sadly, too often a kind of 1950s view of what makes a man a man. And in many instances, what makes a man, especially to other men, is directness, aggression, ego, winning, competition, all these very, very hard kind of attributes. And too often, again, because of the pressure men feel from other men to kind of live up to these man up kind of virtues, it too much ego leads to aggression. It leads to anger. And women are very used to being relied on to be empathetic, to be the problem solver. And because, women are juggling home and work and all these other things, we're very good multitaskers, and we're very goal oriented. We want to get the job done. We're not as concerned with winning as getting the job done. So again, and I'm talking about propensities. I work with a man in special forces who said, well, Joan, my daughter is the least empathetic person you'd ever meet. So yes, not all women are empathetic. Not all men are not empathetic, but we're talking about propensities. And I think what we've seen is that when you have this combination, rather than a hard line gender distinction, you get better leadership. When you have too much ego, and there's very nuanced differences between, for example, aggression and being assertive. You can be assertive without crossing into that aggression. But too many times I've heard it personally, have a man say to his son, be aggressive in all things. You must be aggressive. And aggression too often leads to counterproductive anger, where it becomes not reaching a goal, but winning for the sake of ego. That said, men are more self-confident than women. And when I looked at women in leadership, in many instances, women are kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't. If you show too much, if you try to be assertive like a man, well, then you're not seen as assertive. You're seen as problematic. So women have this very difficult line to walk. And the women that I interviewed were fabulous, down to a person. and said very often their role in a room was to tamp down aggression and to voice options that wouldn't otherwise be heard. Women are prudent, and prudence does not mean indecisive. It means able to see obstacles and deal with them towards reaching your goal. So it's, prudence is good. George Washington was a huge advocate of prudence. Napoleon, prudence, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's this idea of leadership, as you said. Rickover is one of my favorite examples. People don't know a lot about Admiral Hyman Rickover, but he was the father of the nuclear navy, and he accomplished the goal he accomplished of putting a nuclear submarine to sea and getting the United States in a position of superiority after World War II is remarkable. But he did it through just cutthroat means with an ego that really outsized his 5'2", 120-pound stature. So is he a good leader or a bad leader? Well, he's an effective leader. He's a very effective leader. He became, a 4-star admiral. The Navy tried repeatedly to get rid of him, but he was so powerful with Congress. So leadership is complex. Mm-hmm. And I think once we kind of understand the complexity and the importance of context, that not all leaders are leaders in any field. Dwight Eisenhower as a general was much happier than Dwight Eisenhower as a president. So it's tough. Let me get this back on.
I have my cable. I don't have any. Great. So yeah, but I'm particularly appreciative of all of the examples, right? So we have real life sort of stories about how people have worked through these issues and found leadership in different ways, but also, again, underscored by this evidence-driven research that you have that shows us sort of the backstories of how we can understand leadership. And so, you have so many of these case studies and stories. Do you have any favorite ones or ones that stick in your mind or underscore the kind of message your book has for us?
Well, we could go on for hours with my favorite stories, but a few of them, yeah, because I do think they're illustrative. I had a student at the Naval War College, Army. He was Army, and one of the best students I ever had. He left the War College and went off to Iraq. And about, 3 years later, we kept in touch. I got a call from him one night from Baghdad, and he said he was going to he was on his second tour, and he had decided that he was burnt out, that he was not making good decisions, or he was beginning to worry that he wouldn't make good decisions for himself, for his soldiers. And so he was going to opt out of a third tour and take an educational billet and get an advanced degree. And would I write him a letter of recommendation? And of course I would. Well, fast forward, I went to see him and his family a couple of years later during his academic studies. And he said, well, I need to tell you a follow-up story. He said, one day in the field, we had a really rough week. We had taken losses, and a helicopter landed, and our commanding general got out. And he said, I assumed he was there to kind of pump us up and, really give us a talk. And he said the general came storming over to my student and pulled him aside and said, I hear you're taking an educational billet rather than re-upping. And he said, yes, I am. He said, I'm doing it for not only my own benefit, but for the soldiers I work with. I'm worried about burnout. And the general said, well, I just want you to know, if you take that educational billet, I will ruin your career. I will make sure you never get another command. I will make sure you never make general officer. And he walked off and got in his helicopter and left. The question I ask in the book is there ever a set of circumstances where that form of leadership is appropriate? Having never been in combat, maybe there is, but I don't see it. I don't see it because of the burnout. If somebody is telling you that they are suffering or fear they are going to suffer from bad decision making, to say, but just stay where you are, I don't think that is ever appropriate. But I think it gives something to talk about. So that's, by the way, the student took the educational billet,
Yeah.
um, and ended up spending the rest of his career teaching.
Oh,
But he never regretted it, never regretted doing that. So that's kind of one story that I thought was, there's very, think about that. In terms of gender, in my Women, Peace, and Security, my Harvard Women, Peace, and Security class, I had another Army officer, and he had his career intelligence. And at the end of the class, I ended it by saying, is there anything anybody else wants to say? Any thoughts you want to add? And he raised his hand. He said, I do. I'm angry. And I thought, oh boy, what's he angry about? And I said, at me? And he said, no, I'm not angry at you. He said, I'm angry that I have taken every course offered to intelligence officers by the military, and nobody has ever mentioned gender to me. No one has ever talked about the value added nature of inclusion of women. And he said, and now I'm thinking back of reports that I've written and given to colleagues for their use in the field, and how incomplete they might have been because I didn't know to consider gender. I didn't realize how important that was in a security setting. And I mean, we know when we went into Iraq, when the United States went into Iraq, and we didn't understand the Sunni Shia um, conflict, how detrimental that was to us. Well, if you go into a security environment and you don't realize that a man is not considered a man by the community until he is married with children, but yet there's a shortage of brides, what that man will do in order to get a bride so that he can be a man, what that will mean. I mean, we came to recognize in Afghanistan that as the price that a man had to pay for a bride went up, Taliban recruiting went up because they would do whatever they needed to do to earn the money to buy a bride, because otherwise they were not considered part of the male community. So having the student say that to me, that he was thinking back at his own reports and how they were remiss of a perspective that could have been critical to the people there, was very impactful to me.
I'm reminded of some of the conversations I've had with individuals who said that, it's very difficult. Again, how do you underscore or convince individuals that this really matters, and it matters in the outcomes, that it always seems that it's like show me the money, right? Sort of, and once there is that assessment that they can see, right, that it does matter, that having these insights by, individuals who can provide that, that diversity in the room will be the way in which one can say, yes, right, if you can show me the value added, I understand, right? I will be able to work with this. I think that's such a valuable lesson.
Yeah, some of the members of the cultural support teams that I mentioned earlier formed a group called All True after the cultural support teams were disbanded by the military because the military said, we don't need them anymore. Well, they will need them, but again, so when they disbanded, they've been working very hard to continue to give evidence of the value. And did a film series called Guerrera, which is currently on Netflix. It's a three-part series that really tells their story. And I think, again, part of what they say, part of what the men in this series say is, we didn't think it was going to work. And then we saw it and went, oh, yeah, we need these women to go with us.
Hmm.
Seeing is believing. So.
Right. So then let's look forward. I mean, many people are worried today. We've seen a backlash against women in leadership roles. On what threshold do these lessons you give us in the book take us? So what's the future of leadership then?
Well, I think that's going to be what we make it. I think there's a lot of fear, very justifiably, when judges are threatened for their rulings, when all these different things going on. I think there's a lot of fear. I've seen so many. I've had invitations canceled because it's considered talking about leadership in conjunction with masculine and feminine. It's considered too touchy for organizations that rely on government funding or on government connections. But I think, nevertheless, we need to keep pressing. We need to keep pressing it through organizations like WIIS, through what WIIS can do, talking to the media, to Congress, to different organizations, and what other similar organizations can do. Wherever there's an opportunity to speak, we have to. And it can be done. I'm not an advocate of confrontation in terms of verbal. I think that you can, I do believe, I heard this from someone else and I kind of carried it with me. You you can't be a chip, have a chip or be a chump. And that means women can't walk around with a chip on their shoulder, ready to tell some guy off. Number one, it's exhausting. And number two, nobody will want to work with you. But you can't be a chump either and get walked on all the time. So you really have to pick your battles. I find I can be much more effective in trying to, first of all, just tell people at kind of the education aspect, and be very specific. Second, there are times when, again, I hear statements that are blatantly false, and I know are blatantly false, and I will follow that up. And I kind of enjoy doing this by saying, can you give me a specific example of that? I write a lot of books and I'd like to include that. Can you send me to a source? And usually I get well, I heard it from somebody. Well, I can give you a specific example of where that is not true and try to educate people that way. If we stop talking, then we become complicit. And I don't want to do that.
Yes, very wise words. Thank you so, so much, Joan. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you about your book, and I hope people will read it and glean the valuable lessons you've given us about what makes and doesn't make a good leader, but a very effective and a great leader. So thank you again.
Thank you, Karin, and we just need to keep talking.
Need to keep talking.